Many people have said, oh, that's the gospel where Jesus goes on and on, explaining himself. Of all the gospel writers, this one is the most mystical one. Jesus is described as the Word made flesh. In the beginning was the Word was one. And so this Jesus, through the lens of John, is really seen through Isaiah 55, who recognizes a different kind of Messiah, a suffering one in service, who is pouring out his life in love for us, willingly. So hear these words, this time in John's gospel that's at a pivotal point just before Jesus enters Jerusalem. John chapter 11, verses 1 through 16, from Eugene Peterson's translation, The Message. A man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary, and his sister Martha. This was the same Mary who massaged the Lord's feet with aromatic oils and then wiped them with her hair. It was her brother Lazarus who was sick. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Master, the one you love is so very sick. And when Jesus got the message, he said, this sickness is not fatal. It will become an occasion to show God's glory by glorifying God's Son. Jesus loved Martha and her sister Mary and Lazarus. But oddly, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed on where he was for 2 more days. After 2 days, he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. They said, Rabbi, you can't do that. The Jews are out to kill you and you're going back? Jesus replied, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in daylight doesn't stumble because there's plenty of light from the sun. Walking at night, he might very well stumble because he can't see where he's going. He said these things and announced, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to wake him up. The disciples said, Master, if he's gone to sleep, he'll get a good rest and wake up feeling fine. But Jesus was talking about death, while his disciples thought he was talking about taking a nap. Then Jesus became explicit. Lazarus died. And I am glad for your sakes that I wasn't there. You're about to be given new grounds for believing. Now let's go to him. That's when Thomas, the one called the twin, said to his companions, come along, we might as well die with him. So ends our reading. And let's now hear the music for preparation. And our reading from John's Gospel continues, chapter 11, verses 17 through 45. And so when Jesus finally got there, he found Lazarus already dead for 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, only a couple of miles away, and many of the Jews were visiting Mary and Martha, sympathizing with them over their brother. Martha heard Jesus was coming and went out to meet him. Mary remained in the house. Martha said, Master, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Even now, I know that whatever you ask God, he will give you. Jesus said, your brother will be raised up. Martha replied, I know that he will be raised up in the resurrection at the end of time. And Jesus said, you don't have to wait for the end. I am, right now, resurrection and life. The one who believes in me, even though he or she dies, will live. And everyone who lives believing in me does not ultimately die at all. Do you believe this? Yes, Master. All along I have believed that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who comes into the world. After saying this, she went to her sister Mary and whispered in her ear, the teacher is here and asking for you. The moment she heard that, she jumped up and ran out to him. Jesus had not yet entered the town, but was still at the place where Martha met him. When her sympathizing Jewish friends saw Mary run off, they followed her, thinking she was on her way to the tomb to weep there. Mary came to where Jesus was waiting and fell at his feet, saying, "Master, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her sobbing, and the Jews with her sobbing, a deep anger welled up within him. He said, "Where did you put him?" "Master, come and see," they said. And now Jesus wept. And the Jews said, "Look how deeply he loved him." And others among them said, "If he loved him so much, then why didn't he do something to keep him from dying? After all, he opened the eyes of a blind man." Then Jesus, the anger again welling up from within him, arrived at the tomb. It was a simple cave in a hillside with a slab of stone laid against it. Jesus said, "Remove the stone." The sister of the dead man, Martha, said, "Master, by this time there's a stench. He's been dead for 4 days." Jesus looked her in the eye. "Didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" Then to the others, "Go ahead, take away the stone." They removed the stone. Jesus raised his eyes to heaven and prayed, "Father, I'm grateful to you that you have listened to me. I know you always do listen, but on account of the crowd standing there, I've spoken so that they may believe that you sent me." Then he shouted, "Lazarus, come out." And he came out, a cadaver, wrapped from head to toe, with a kerchief over his face. And Jesus told them, "Unwrap him and let him loose." So ends our reading. Let us meditate on these words in the sanctuary of our hearts and minds. Please pray with me. Come, Holy Spirit, fill our hearts and kindle us all in the power of your love. Send forth your Spirit that we may all be renewed. Together, through you, we shall renew the face of the earth. Amen. Just want to do a quick check-in. That was a long reading. There's so much in it. What are your emotional responses to that reading before we get into today's gospel? There's not a right or wrong, just emotional responses.
It's really graphic.
It's very graphic. It's kind of frightening. Others? Well, go ahead, David. Jesus got angry. Wow. And Jesus wept and got angry. Yeah, what else? Perplexion. What is this and why? Raised for what purpose? What? Was Lazarus like an object so Jesus could prove something? Or is John speaking metaphorically here? Like when John talks about, "I am the way, I am the light, I am the bread of life, I am living water." Does he literally mean that, or is there something else? It's like the spirit language trying to convey spiritual themes to human beings, but they don't quite get it. Like that, weeks ago we talked about being born again, and Nicodemus is so perplexed. What does this mean? How can I crawl back into my mother's womb and be born again? Katie, you look like you're going to say.
I think he's impatient. He seems impatient. He's angry, he's sad, but he's impatient that they're not getting it. That he can
Impatient, angry, sad, they're not getting it? Why else might he be stressed as a human being? It gives you hope. Yeah, there's not a right or wrong. It gives you hope. Say more.
Jesus is the Messiah.
And in John's gospel, Jesus knows it's like, I am here on a mission, pouring out my love, nonviolent response in the face of rejection, in the face of disbelief. So in John's story about Jesus, he's just on his mission. And ultimately, it gives you hope, like facing resistance in your life. Thank you. So John's gospel is set like probably 125 AD. And one of the things when I read it, one of the reactions is like this big generalization about the Jews. And we're remembering Jesus was Jewish. Jesus was a rabbi, right? And so one of the themes that's happening within this community, because so much time has passed, they're trying to separate more from their Jewish roots. And politically, there's more and more persecutions happening from Rome, and so it's easier to shift blame and scapegoat the Jews rather than, a select group of religious leaders in collusion with the Roman government. So it's a context. There's so much here in this, and it's so different from the earlier three Gospels. So this past week, I've been thinking a lot about what does it mean to be drawn out of our tombs, and out of our denial, out of our blindness, out of our numbness, and another kind of numbness is like facing the reality of mortality. Jesus, the human Jesus, is facing his mortality. We all face our mortality. It's kind of a terrifying story too. Someone we love coming out of a tomb it's so graphic. So this gospel is really at the turning point of Jesus' ministry. This particular reading in John's gospel, because raising Lazarus in John's narrative is the crowning miracle that reveals Jesus as the giver of life. And it also precipitates his death. And the raising of Lazarus provokes a meeting of the Sanhedrin. Those are the chief religious leaders, the official Jewish court. And they reach a decision that Jesus is dangerous and must be killed. And so next week we come to Palm Sunday, and we begin this anguish and ultimately the joy of Holy Week. And this story, to me, it hits me in this place of desolation and loss and despair. Lazarus, whom Jesus loved, has died. We've all known death and the way it hits us in the gut. He's been dead for 4 days. And his sisters, Mary and Martha, are in distress, grieving with family and friends. There are current scholars that believe that this is a whole nother sermon that I won't go into. They believe that Martha was inserted into this, and this is all about Mary. It was Lazarus and Mary. And this is Mary of Magdala, the tower. And she is the one that she testifies that he is the Messiah, the same one who's there at the cross. But that's a whole nother sermon for a whole nother time. So the story begins right where we are, in this world that's full of death, full of grieving, full of loss. Mary and Martha taste the same bitterness that we taste when loved ones die. They know the pang of sorrow that can seize us in the middle of the night, that can make our hearts anguish, and they know how empty we can feel. So today, we might be we have a break. Maybe we're not in that place, but maybe we are. Because there's so much death in the air around us these days. Watching the news makes me scared. The rise of nationalism and militarism, sectarianism, extreme growing wealth inequality globally, and the existential threat of climate crisis. Even as we speak on this beautiful, clear day, there continues to be fossil fuels that are being pumped into the atmosphere, pumping CO2. All these heat-trapping gases that are further disrupting this delicate balance. How many of you remember last Tuesday's violent storm? Okay, winds over 70 miles an hour, 2 storms colliding and then spinning off. It was pretty unpredictable. Trees falling, huge traffic jams in San Francisco, avalanches. How many of you were stuck in it? Catherine?
Well, Skyline Boulevard had a huge tree on both sides around our street, so we're sort of trapped here.
It was trapped, and people lost power. There were like preschoolers here until 6:45 waiting for parents who were stuck in San Francisco because there was a tractor that turned, it was like on the bridge. But it's easy to just move on, isn't it? Like, oh, well, that was last week's news. Now we're on to this week. What's going to happen on Tuesday? Is it going to be another superstorm? Or worrying about, with all this rain, is it going to be even more deadly this summer in terms of fires? How many of you find yourself just, it's like just moving from one thing to the next? But few of us wonder why these things are happening, why these increasingly deadly weather events are happening. So last year, this church bravely divested from larger banks that fund fossil fuels and searched for a bank that didn't. And that bank was First Republic. A bank, I know, there's a bank that's now struggling in the wake of the banking crisis. I'd like to say I was one of the brave ones that was saying, no, we need to stay loyal to the bank. It's like, no, we need to find something. Anyway, on the surface, these things may seem to be unrelated, but they are not. They are very related. And I think it's easy to go numb rather than to face our fears and our pain. It's easy to become too distracted to stop and connect the dots between these trends. And speaking from my own personal experience, it's easy to just focus on my own personal survival and short-term economic interests at the sake of the future of all of us. Anybody else there with me? It's just me. I know. Yeah. And I think the unjust powers of the world would prefer that we remain numb, distracted, like zombies, who are too busy or too bored or too distracted, too defended to feel the pain that allows something new to be born, to be imagined. In just 200 years, it's the blink of an eye in geologic time, human beings have burned so much coal, so much gas and oil have been released into the heat-trapping CO2 in the atmosphere. The levels are higher than our species has ever experienced before. Last year was the hottest year on record. How many years have we heard that? Crushing the year before, crushing the year before. The trend continues. And as global temperatures rise, every living thing on this planet is affected and is in decline. Sea ice is melting. Some of you might be like, stop, I don't want to hear it, I already know, I don't want to face it, I don't want to deal with it, I want to think about it, myself included. Storms are becoming more intense, it's undeniable. How many of you read about Mississippi, the tornadoes? How about South Africa? 500 people killed, 1 million people displaced. Droughts are spreading. That happened just last month. Droughts are spreading, extensive floods, fires. The big question is, how could the Pacific Ocean that's so cold heat up so quickly or rise, like something, storms increase their intensity because of warmer waters. And it's not just an environmental problem. It's not just about polar bears or coral. It's about people. People in South Africa, it was Cyclone Freddy. It was a world-breaking extreme storm. Malawi, Mozambique, Madagascar, over 1 million people displaced. Think of it. Didn't make headline news here. It's about Pacific Islanders whose homelands are flooding. It's about impoverished people. Food scarcity is getting worse, not better, in this world, in this planet. And the ones who are hit the hardest are the people living in the southern hemisphere. Hit first and hit hardest by climate change, have the fewest resources to adapt to it, and are the least responsible for causing it. There's a great injustice in all of this. So that's where we find ourselves. You know, here we are looking out. It's like everything's perfect. Nothing's wrong. Look out there. It's a beautiful world. It is a beautiful world. It is such a beautiful creation. It is so precious. But our planet is ailing. And the web of life, the created web of life, is unraveling before our eyes. And when we hear bad news like that, it can be easy to shut down, hard to face the grief and the helplessness that we feel. And our fears can just continue. I know most of us here are not climate skeptics. I don't think there's anyone here who's a climate skeptic. This isn't God punishing us. This is a result of human consequences. But I think on some level, we, myself included, feel so helpless. To imagine and to participate in creating a better future, it can seem so overwhelming. And so we kind of carry on with business as usual, as if we're under this spell. And the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called it this global suicide pact. That's where our gospel begins this morning, in the pit, in the despair, in the valley of the shadow of death. Mary and Martha are bereft. And then something changes. Jesus arrives, and he sees Mary weeping, and the crowds around her weeping, and Jesus is greatly disturbed. He's angry, greatly disturbed in the spirit and deeply moved, as if the gospel writer wants to make the meaning perfectly clear. A few verses later, we come to the shortest verse in the entire Bible. Jesus wept. He wept. This is no distant God. This is no far-off deity, untouched by grief. A God who comes to us, one of us, one who meets us in our suffering, one who suffers with us, a God who shares our pain. When we feel anguish, it's easy to look to someone else to blame and conclude that God isn't real, that God is punishing us, or God has abandoned us. But gazing at Jesus in this story reveals something different. When our hearts are breaking, God's is too. So I think it's heart-opening, it's mind-opening to discover that when we weep for the earth, for the land, for the air, for the water, for the soil, for the people, for all creatures, when we feel outrage and protest, God is grieving with us and through us, and is bearing what we cannot bear alone. The fact that Jesus wept reminds us of our first step in healing. The first step in breathing new life, in birthing new life, comes when we step into the pain, not away from it. And when we do so, when we step into that pain, we know that we are in the presence of someone, that presence who loves us. The God who enters into suffering knows that place, knows that new life begins only when we're willing to enter into and feel the pain. And when we grieve in God's presence, we move out of that numbness, out of inertia, out of the denial that pretends that everything's fine. Joanna Macy, the wise Buddhist teacher, puts it like this: don't ever apologize for crying for the trees or burning in the Amazon, or over the waters that are polluted from mines in the Rockies. Don't apologize for the sorrow or the grief or the rage that you feel. It's a sign of your humanity and your maturity. We are capable of suffering with our world, and that is the true meaning of compassion. It enables us to recognize our profound interconnectedness with all things. Where do you feel the pain for the earth? In your gut? In your heart? In your mind? Or have you gone numb because it's too painful to bear? Where do you hear the groaning of creation, of God's creation? I think the unjust powers of the world, if I was going to personify them, don't want us to grieve or protest. They want us. They don't want us to feel outrage or sorrow. They don't want us to feel anything. They want us to be numb. They don't want us to feel the outrage and the sorrow that we feel when we face deathly patterns that are part of our society. The racism, the militarism, the abuse of the helpless, the poisoning of the air and the water, the relentless assault on the web of life. The powers that be would prefer that we remain numb, like zombies. Too busy, too bored, too distracted, too defended to feel the pain that allows something new to be imagined, something new to be born. Jesus wept. And it is in that weeping lies the beginning of new life. In the vulnerability of his open heart, Jesus opens to a power greater than himself. Take away the stone, he says to this astonished crowd. Can you imagine what they were thinking? Are you nuts? But reluctantly, eagerly, maybe daring to hope against hope, some folks move forward and they lean their weight into that stone and they push it. They push away, and the entrance of the tomb is revealed. And then comes Jesus' voice. In the midst of the weeping, there comes this voice. Lazarus, he says, come out. It's a voice, a power, a summons It addresses us by name. You've heard that voice before, and so have I. Deep inside of us, there is a presence, a voice, a someone who calls us to quit hiding in a deathly place, to step out into the fullness of life. Anybody know what I'm talking about? We can go on for a while, maybe a long time, not engaging with reality, not engaging with the climate crisis, just laying low, hiding out. Ducking from everything that seems too hard to face, too hard to bear. And the powers that be want to keep it that way. They murmur, that's okay, get comfy in that little tomb. Make peace with it, decorate it, make it a home, stay small. But then comes that persistent, disturbing voice calling us by name. Adam, it says, come out. Nancy, Mike, Tom, Carolyn, Rod, Yvonne, David, each one of us by name, come out. Laurie, come out. I love you, God says to us. I want you to be fully alive, not just partially alive, not just going through the motions. I want you to grow into your full stature. I want you to be deeply rooted and rising up. I've loved you into being. I sent you into the world to fall in love. And I call you now to serve love without holding back. So come out of your hiding place. Come out of your helplessness. Come out of your fearfulness and join the struggle to save life on this sweet earth. The resurrection life that I give you doesn't start beyond the grave. It starts right now. I didn't create you to live in a tomb. When I look around, I see a planet that's catapulting on the edge of a ticking time bomb toward destruction. But I also see person after person stepping up, standing up, acting up, engaging together with one another to be part of the change that is needed. You all know on a practical level what we can do. Go ahead, list some things. Composting, being a green sanctuary, driving less, carpooling, what? Go ahead.
Say no to plastic.
Say no to plastic, ban styrofoam, yes. And what we can do together, because we can't do it alone. And so I give thanks for this congregation. You know, we're a small congregation, and we have many partners, and we, together with our partners, have and will continue to do great things. Right here in the Bay Area, there are so many partners, the No Colon Oakland group, the Sierra group, California Interfaith Power and Light, 350bayarea.org, and our national denomination. And I know it's challenging. Sometimes it's like, you know, trying to, like, the latest guidelines on composting. I love, as hard as it is, I love that we are a green congregation. I love that we're bringing forth best practices, not only for our congregation, but for a preschool and for every group that comes here. Passing on something to children, you know, and to couples that are getting married and people celebrating the lives of those they love, and music groups. I love that we have solar energy here on this campus. And I love, as hard as it is, I love that we've made that hard decision to divest from Chase, and that we continue to hold to our commitment to divest from fossil fuels, while at the same time trying to preserve our endowment. They're hard decisions, this balancing. April is officially the month that we honor the earth, but I think that every day is a time to honor the earth. every single day. We were made for a time like this, a time when God is calling each one of us out from the tomb of inertia and despair and wholehearted focus and justice-seeking, spirit-led, unstoppable movement to protect the world that God has entrusted us with, and to protect the ones who are most vulnerable in it. Amen. And we'll now hear our sermon response.
And our sermon response we found in your New Century Hymnal on 484, "O Come to Me, Ye Weary," singing verses 1 and 2.